What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, it's Monday. You know what time it is. It is time for the waiver wire video. This week, the potential players that you can get off of the waiver wire, it's much stronger in the running back position. I think the highlights definitely at tight end this week. There really aren't that many wide receivers that are not already taken in most leagues that are really available that could help your roster, but we'll go over them anyways. Before we do that though, as you know, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which tight end with at least 20 targets post the league's best catch rate. The correct answer was actually TJ Hawkinson. Congratulations to Toby Bauer, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which wide receiver with at least 30 targets is currently the league leader in yards after catch per reception? Once again, that's which wide receiver with a minimum of 30 targets currently leads the league in yards after catch per reception. Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, with news blurbs coming out every day on the health of some of these players, that is overall going to impact the value of the players on the waiver wire. If you want to stay fully up to date, the absolute best way to do that is to go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. All the information on the waivers is listed there for members. On there, you can also gain access to our rankings, trade targets, sports betting picks, DFS picks, and more. So if that interests you, once again, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. Without further ado, though, guys, let's start with the running backs that are currently available. I did mention earlier that the running back portion was a bit stronger this week. It's led by Boston Scott, taking the place of the injured Miles Sanders. If you guys did not know or were unaware, Miles Sanders, he had a huge breakaway play, almost scored a open field touchdown. He was actually tackled from behind by a Ravens defender. In the process of that, it kind of looked like he hyperextended his knee. I'm not a doctor though. I'm not a doctor though. It's unclear exactly how severe the injury is. The Eagles are cautiously optimistic. However, at this point, we don't know exactly how long he will be out. However, Miles Sanders, even leading up to this season, was already a player that we had injury concerns with. It was one of the main reasons we had Boston Scott as a player to target in the later rounds. But with Miles Sanders actually starting this season relatively healthy and performing well, Boston Scott kind of fell to the wayside. He wasn't seeing many snaps. His production outside of being a handcuff for fantasy was virtually non-existent. So at this point, he's really only owned in about 11% of leagues. I assume those leagues are mostly owners of Miles Sanders. Anytime a player is only owned in 11% of leagues, most of you guys out there can get them. So it should be very clear exactly why Boston Scott leads this list, even if Miles Sanders is out for a period of 2 to 4 weeks. It's very likely that Boston Scott can be a player you trust in your lineup as early as the first week with Miles Sanders out. The past few games for Sanders hasn't really been positive matchups for him. He faced San Francisco, followed by Pittsburgh, then followed it up with Baltimore. So most Sanders owners were looking at this portion of the schedule, licking their lips, hoping to get that maximum production out of a player who's actually been performing well in these bad matchups. For those of you in deeper leagues though, or maybe you're in a league that has waiver wire sharks loading up on running backs, Corey Clement is still a player out there that might be worth rostering. Of course, we wouldn't feel comfortable starting him in week 1, but we can't rule out the possibility of this being a time split. Boston Scott, yes, he's a superior pass catcher, but we can't throw out the fact that he is very undersized. Corey Clement, he has had success being a red zone running back for this team in the past. Doug Peterson historically has also used running backs by committee. So if Sanders does end up missing significant time, we realize both of these players are getting valuable touches. Boston Scott with the receptions, Corey Clement with the goal line work. That would be a situation in which both players should be rostered. We're moving into the next player though, and this was a running back who was on our list last week. It's Giovani Bernard. With Dalvin Cook facing a somewhat significant injury and Alexander Madison's projected value was growing rapidly, it was a wake-up call that we need to be rostering all these handcuff running backs. At the time, no, Joe Mixon was not at any increased injury risk. Largely the reason why Giovani Bernard is so available is because Joe Mixon has been so safe and reliable, but some of you who are not owners of Joe Mixon may not be aware that he was actually knocked out of the game. The positive news though, he did return in the second half. That bodes very well for his availability as early as next week, so the value of Giovani Bernard, it does still remain as more of a handcuff, not somebody you could start without that injury. But this is the NFL. Running backs, they get injured each and every week. Joe Mixon already showing kinks in the armor. Who's to say this isn't something he re-aggravates in practice, potentially gets knocked out of another game? So maybe if you're a Joe Mixon owner, you should overvalue having the handcuff of Giovani Bernard, or if you're somebody who's really desperate to fill your running back position like many of us out there, Bernard's a player who, if given the workload, could definitely post high-end RB2 numbers. The next running back we have is Justin Jackson. Really nothing too crazy to go over. He's also owned in over 50% of leagues, so most of you really can't go out there and get him. So this is more of a reminder, even if they are owned on Wednesday, take a look at who players dropped. You'd be surprised. Joshua Kelly, Justin Jackson, these are some names I could definitely see out there dropped. They are definitely looked at as more of short-term rentals. Knowing which player you could actually trust in your lineup could also be a headache. So I could see a situation where maybe a Miles Sanders owner or a Joe Mixon owner does drop one of those players to secure that handcuff, in which you can definitely benefit in that situation. Behind him, we have J.D. McKissic. McKissic played a very significant role in the passing game out of the running back position. This was a role we had seen Antonio Gibson mainly produce in, but McKissic, he was virtually featured in this area, and it correlated very, very well with the change of quarterback. As we know, whenever there is a change in quarterback, the favorite players to target, the overall distribution of those targets, it has the potential to change dramatically. While we all know Antonio Gibson should be on the field for all 3 downs, the Washington organization is not known to make the best decisions, so would it surprise anybody if they continue to give field time to J.D. McKissic? No, not at all. The reason he doesn't rank higher though is because I do see him as a player eventually going to get phased out in favor of Gibson. His value also sinks dramatically, going from PPR to half PPR, even further going to standard where he's virtually unstartable. But I'll tell you firsthand, I played against him in a PPR league and he scored more points than David Montgomery. Behind him, we virtually have the opposite. It's Gus Edwards. Unlike McKissic, who gets most of his production in the receiving game, Gus Edwards, he's a north-south rusher. I will give him credit though. He's always had a knack for being efficient. He's always been able to carve out his own role in the offense despite playing with Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram, and J.K. Dobbins. And if you're able to take any field time or touches away from any of those players, you're a guy that deserves some respect. I know most people will probably have him ranked higher on the waiver list than I do. My main concern with him though is his lack of usage in the receiving game, the talent of J.K. Dobbins as well, and with Mark Ingram's injury not listed as being all that serious, at least from what we know right now, I'm not really sure I would feel confident starting a player like Edwards, expecting the volume to go the same way and hopefully get that score like he did last week, because if he doesn't and he's getting no receiving work, his floor, it's going to be very low each week. The final player we have is LaMical Perine. It may surprise you guys as well that I have him very low, but the fact of the matter is, this offense, it's just really, really bad. Yes, as opposed to some of these other rushers, he has more long-term potential with Le'Veon Bell no longer on the roster. But no matter what, best case scenario is for most of the season, he's splitting time with Frank Gore, and even if he does get the lion's share of those touches, how valuable really is it in this New York Jets offense? To be frank, everything we've seen from Perine, it hasn't really jumped off the table and shouted talent. So if you're somebody investing in Perine, it's definitely more for the opportunity side of it as opposed to the ability. And while yes, there could be a potential down the road for volume, the value of that volume when compared to other rushers and better offenses, you really just can't expect the same type of production. Alright guys, we're moving over to wide receivers, and like I said, this isn't a great week for them. Travis Fulgham, definitely the player you should be looking out for. There's no question at this point, he is the go-to guy in the receiving game. Zach Ertz, he went down with an injury. Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, we can't use those players to avoid Fulgham because A, neither one of them has really stepped on the field, and B, if they do, will they be productive? Both players have performed questionably, whereas Fulgham, he stepped up and he's actually looked really good doing it. Big shout out though to Chase Claypool, who also had another good game. I didn't include him on this list because he should be owned in all leagues. Moving into the next wide receiver though, we have Tim Patrick, currently owned in 18% of leagues. As much as we try to not want to buy into Tim Patrick because of Jerry Jeudy or Noah Fant, maybe use the Drew Lock injury as an excuse not to buy into him, Tim Patrick is doing everything possible to prove us wrong. This past week against New England, he definitely was the lone bright spot in this passing offense. He even eclipsed 100 receiving yards. And believe it or not, this has been back-to-back games he's been able to eclipse that number. The 2 games prior to this one, he also scored a touchdown in each contest. So although he does appear to rank outside the top 30 at the wide receiver position, keep in mind he's already had his bye. His availability will be great for the rest of the season barring injury, and if you actually factor his fantasy points per game, Patrick has actually proven to be a reliable flex player. He's performed well with Lock, he's performed well without him, and as long as Noah Fant is sidelined with an injury, the projected volume that's going to Patrick, it's going to be relatively high. Moving over to a bit of a less exciting player, we once again have Keelan Cole. Keelan Cole was a player who found their way to players' benches, was trusted in probably 1, maybe 2 matchups just to disappoint, then found himself once again back on the waiver wire. Well, here we are again looking at Keelan Cole, who once again had another good performance. DJ Chark was available in this matchup, who received an insane amount of volume but really didn't put it together from a yards per reception standpoint. I can't argue with anybody saying that Keelan Cole looked good in this matchup. Gardner Minshew also played very well, but if I'm being frank, a player like Keelan Cole is really not the type of target I'm looking off the waivers. How many matchups are you really going to feel comfortable replacing one of your starters with a player like Keelan Cole who may have a better matchup? Not often, and when you do, it won't feel good, and odds are the outcome, it will not be in your favor. We had even seen when DJ Chark was actually held out with an injury and the expected volume that was going to go to Cole, it really didn't pan out as expected. So even viewing him as a potential safe player who could take an uptick if anything were to happen to Chark, we've already seen at the earlier part of this season that it really didn't shape out as we expected. The next receiver we have is another familiar name. It's James Washington. This is yet again another player who I wouldn't be thrilled to hold on my bench. Yes, it's true that with Deontay Johnson out, he did see an uptick in overall volume, but it's really difficult to say with certainty that the target distribution that we saw in this past game is what we're going to continue to see if Deontay Johnson misses time. On Sunday, he received 7 targets. A player like James Washington, 7 targets is more than enough to get the job done, especially when defenses have to worry about the beast Chase Claypool as well as the underperforming Juju. So yes, the deep shots, they're going to be there. Which weeks we can actually rely on that? I don't think we can say with certainty either that it's going to be reliant on matchup. So the way that I view James Washington, it's not so much like a Mecole Hardman who has maximum upside if a player like Sammy Watkins misses. No, it's more like a Marvin Jones. And what I mean by that is players like Marvin Jones, when you factor in the matchup, the health or lack thereof of the receiving weapons around them, maybe leading to more volume in that game, the expectations for all of those variables, it usually didn't align with the results on the field. So overall, I'm not really trusting James Washington. Yes, he had a good performance, but it was on 7 targets. Deontay Johnson will continue to get healthy, and as long as Chase Claypool is playing as well as he is, I don't see any way they don't force feed him the ball even more. The final receivers to be keeping an eye out for on the waiver wire, I'm going to group together, and this is the Colts wide receivers. And no, I'm not talking about T.Y. Hilton. I'm talking about Zach Pascal, Marcus Johnson, and even Michael Pittman. Nick put out a great tweet yesterday. Definitely check him out on Twitter. It's Nick Zylak FFA. It said the Colts passing offense threw for 371 yards. T.Y. Hilton, however, had just 1 reception for 11 yards. Guys, this is basically another AJ Green situation, meaning we overall have to rethink the way that we're looking at this passing offense. Clearly, a lot of it runs through Jonathan Taylor, especially in plus matchups. but we all saw it. Phillip Rivers, he looked damn good on Sunday. We knew with a free agent quarterback or free agent wide receivers, whenever you're changing teams, there is a bit of a learning curve. I do think that players like Tom Brady, obviously Phillip Rivers, their better, more consistent, and predictable games are likely going to come during the second half of the season. Well, guys, think of it. We're in week 7. We're 1 week away from the midpoint. So while yes, Phillip Rivers did take advantage of a subpar passing defense, I'm still not ruling out the fact that he can still support fantasy relevant wide receivers that we really haven't seen thus far. Michael Pittman, he's injured. Most people don't even have him rostered, but with the COVID rules, most of your leagues, they have an IR slot. If you're not using it, fill it with Pittman. Zach Pascal, he had a great game. And even if both of those receivers are taken, there is still the option of Marcus Johnson, whose production and snaps have been trending upward, and when given the opportunity, he's looked good every time. It's difficult to say that Phillip Rivers will continue to perform this well. We also can't say how the targets are going to ultimately end up getting split up, but if you're looking for a player to just take a shot on, take a wait and see approach with, I would definitely stock up on some of these Indianapolis receivers. Alright guys, we're moving over to tight end, and this is what I said in the beginning I really thought was the highlight of all of the waiver positions. The leader, of course, Dallas Goedert. Yes, I'm aware he's still on IR and we don't know exactly when he will return, but Zach Ertz, I think we all can admit at this point, he looks pretty washed. I wouldn't rule out a trade. He also left the game with an injury. At this point, we don't know how severe it is, but imagine an offense where Dallas Goedert was the leading tight end when it comes to targets. Outside of Fulgham, he's really been the only receiver on this team that's actually looked good in every opportunity. So if he comes back healthy with no Ertz, potentially Alshon, Deshaun Jackson being non-factors down the stretch, we're talking Dallas Goedert with top 6 tight end upside. Behind him, we have Trey Burton, who is clearly trending towards being the tight end leader on this offense, previously held by Mo Alley Cox. And quite frankly, that is one of the most valuable tight end positions in every possible NFL team. Phillip Rivers, he loves tight ends. We've seen a strong correlation of his tendencies to target running backs as well as the tight end position. It definitely translated from San Diego or Los Angeles over to Indianapolis. So whichever tight end is going to be filling that role, they're likely going to be an every week starter. As we know though, Trey Burton, he's coming back from an injury. His volume already in his first 2 games back is very promising, but even with that, the odds are if he continues to perform while also becoming more healthy as the season progresses, his snap share, his route participation, those are also going to increase as well. We've seen the type of ceiling he has, scoring 2 touchdowns, even rushing 1 in. Imagine if he's a player who has almost a full-time role on this offense. That's a guy you could trust each week. Behind him, we have Logan Thomas. This was a player we probably gave up a little too soon on because it shouldn't have been all that surprising that he had a bounce-back game with Kyle Allen at the helm. Kyle Allen, a much more accurate passer. That means the quality of the targets going Logan Thomas's direction. Many more of those balls will be deemed catchable. He will be able to make more plays. Because believe it or not, Logan Thomas throughout the entire season thus far has the lowest catch rate of all qualified tight ends. No, that's not all on him. Most of it was on Haskins. We've seen what he's been able to do with a more accurate passer. So if he continues to get this featured role, a role that he has already established throughout the season, we could definitely see him even producing better than he was earlier on. Behind him, we have Irv Smith Jr. This is certainly a player you could rank higher. The only reason I didn't rank him any higher was that he really had a very solid matchup. It's not each and every week we can expect this offense to be playing Atlanta. And while yes, he was an integral part of this offense, I wouldn't say that he's necessarily already broken out. By taking him as opposed to some of the other tight ends that have established roles that we have ranked higher, you're going to be taking on some risk there. But if you're desperate for a tight end, he's only owned in 2% of leagues, and in positive matchups, we're going to be ranking him quite highly. The next player we have is Anthony Firkser. He is virtually free, coming in owned in just 1% of leagues. Jonnu Smith, as we know, he did go down with an ankle injury. Once again, the information we have is limited, but he's likely going to be out at least a couple weeks. And what we saw from this offense and the production of Anthony Firkser is that when given the opportunity, Firkser can step up and be the guy. Yes, Jonnu Smith is a superior talent, but Firkser, he gave us no reason to doubt his ability to produce. So if you need maybe a 1-week rental, a streaming option, as long as Jonnu Smith is out, I could see Anthony Firkser being in that conversation. The final player we have is Darren Fells. You may be wondering why I have him ranked so low. And the truth is, I'm just not 100% buying into the success of this Houston passing offense. Yes, it's looked much better. Brandon Cooks is involved. They've had more success targeting tight ends, and that has ultimately benefited Darren Fells. However, it's been a very small sample. His 7 targets was a season high. The game before that, even though he scored a touchdown, he only had 2 targets. That's not enough volume for me to trust that to produce each week. So Darren Fells, while he definitely is a strong prospect, a player trending upward, I'm just not sure if I'm 100% buying in. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.